Good morning. My name is Tracy Spinka-Domes, and on behalf of First Unitarian Church of Wilmington, Delaware, I welcome you to our online worship service. First Unitarian is a welcoming congregation, regardless of your spiritual belief, your political views, the color of your skin, how you identify, or whom you love. You are welcome here. We are honored that you have chosen to spend this time with us. If you are visiting us for the first time, we invite you to visit our website, www.firstuuwilm.org, and sign up for our weekly electronic newsletter to stay informed about what is happening in our church community each week. It is my honor to serve as worship associate for one of our own, Ed Scott. Please join me in welcoming him to our pulpit. And now, let us prepare our hearts and minds for worship.
Good morning. Much of the music that you'll be hearing today is inspired by the writings of A.A. Milne. The prelude and meditation are both settings of texts from When We Were Very Young, which are the stories about Christopher Robin. I'll just be playing the music from those songs, but I think you'll hear the character of the stories reflected in the music. And later in the service, Cindy Cohen will be singing two songs from The Hums of Pooh, which are settings of Winnie the Pooh stories. The composer is Harold Fraser Simpson, a British man who wrote this music in the mid-1920s. I had a recording of these songs when I was a kid. I used to listen to them. I remember hearing them. Winnie the Pooh was a big favorite in our household. So maybe some of them will be familiar to you as well. But in any event, I hope you enjoy this music.
Come into this circle of community. Come into this sacred space. Be not tentative. Bring your whole self. Bring the joy that makes your heart sing. Bring your kindness and your compassion. Bring also your sorrow, your pain. Bring your brokenness and your disappointments. Spirit of love and mystery, help us to recognize the spark of the divine that resides within each of us. May we know the joy of wholeness, and may we know the joy of being together.
Today's chalice lighting is written by Atticus Palmer. We call this light before us and hope that we may always remain a strong community, working together to make the world a better place. When we are grieving or sad, when we are challenged, when we need help, this flame guides us out of the darkness. When we are cheerful, when we celebrate, when we accomplish a great task, when we return to a place that makes us happy, the chalice reminds us to share our happiness with others.
The human touch can light the flame, which gives a brightness to the day. The Spirit uses mortal flame, life's vehicle for work and play. The lover's kiss, the friend's embrace, the clasp of hands to show we care, the light of welcome on the face, are treasured moments all can share. May all who come within our reach be kindled by our inner glow, not just in spirit's words we preach, in human touch, love's faith we show.
Please join me in affirming our mission. First Unitarian Church of Wilmington is a beloved community that nourishes minds and spirits, fights injustice, and transforms the world through loving action.
One day, Eeyore was standing by the side of a stream, looking at his reflection. He wandered over to the other side to get a different view, looked at his reflection, and he saw that it was no better. While he was doing this, his friend Pooh came along and asked him, how was his day going? Well, as you can see, there's no candles, there's no cake, there's no presents, no friends, no attention. Not that anyone would notice that it was my birthday anyway. Pooh was surprised. Eeyore, it's your birthday. Stay right here. And Pooh ran off, thinking to himself, I've got to get a present for my friend Eeyore. He's running to his home, and when he gets to his home, he sees Piglet trying to reach up to reach the door knocker, which is just beyond his reach. And Piglet says, Pooh, I can't reach the door knocker. Can you help me? So Pooh reaches up and knocks the knocker, waiting for someone to answer, and he says, this certainly is a long time to wait for someone to answer. Pooh, says Piglet, this is your house. I was coming to see you. Oh, well then let's certainly go in. So they enter in, and when they get in, Pooh explains to Piglet that it's Eeyore's birthday, and they must get him a gift. So Pooh looks around and sees that one of his most valuable possessions, as is true of any bear, is his jars of honey. So he finds one that's not the very biggest. He decides he will take this as a present to Eeyore. And Piglet says, Pooh, that could be a gift from both of us. No, that will not do, says Pooh. You have to get your own present. And Piglet thinks, and he says, I know. I have a balloon left over from my party. I'll go home and get a balloon for Eeyore. That will make him happy. So Piglet runs off to home, and Pooh starts off to Eeyore's with a jar of honey. And when he's gone about halfway, he realizes that he's getting tired, and it's a warm day, and he decides he needs to sit down for a moment. And then he feels this creepy feeling coming up through his body, and he realizes it's time for a little something to eat. So he says, it's a good thing I thought to bring along this honey. So he opens up the jar of honey and dips in and begins to eat. Not very many bears would have thought to bring along something to eat on their walk, says Pooh. So he continues to eat. And as he's feeling satisfied, he gets ready to go on to Eeyore's, and he discovers, oh, bother, I've eaten all the honey that was to be Eeyore's present. The jar is empty. What shall I do? I know. I'll get someone to write on here a happy birthday. It certainly would make a useful jar. So he goes off to his friend Owl's house and talks to Owl and explains what happened. And Owl says, well, it looks like a useful jar, but someone's been storing honey in here. No matter, says Pooh, I will wash it up and it will make a very useful jar. Can you write happy birthday for me? Owl asks Pooh if he's a very good speller, because Owl isn't exactly sure how to spell happy birthday himself. But he writes on the jar. And Pooh looks at the words that Owl has written, and he says, that's a very long happy birthday. And Owl says, well, it says, a very happy birthday with love from Pooh. Oh, Eeyore will be so happy. I'm so glad that we did this. So Pooh heads off to Eeyore's. And in the meantime, Piglet goes home, and he gets the balloon, which he goes running off to Eeyore's, and he's running and running and running. And all of a sudden, he tripped and the balloon popped. And now, what will I do? I know. I'll just have to make do with the balloon as it is. It will still make Eeyore happy. So he goes off to Eeyore's. He meets Eeyore and he gives Eeyore the balloon, and he's sad. He says, Eeyore, I'm really sorry, but I had this birthday balloon for you, and I tripped and it broke. Well, Piglet, are you okay? Did you get hurt? No, I'm not hurt. Well, what color was my balloon when it was a real balloon? It was red. Red is my favorite color. And what size was the balloon? It was about the size of me, said Piglet. Oh, my favorite size, says Eeyore. Then, while they're discussing this, Pooh arrives with the useful jar, presents it to Eeyore, and Eeyore is ecstatic. He is so happy that he has a useful jar. And as Pooh and Piglet are trying to explain to him how this all came about, Eeyore gets busy, putting the balloon in the useful jar, taking the balloon out, putting the balloon in, and taking the balloon out. And Eeyore is so happy that he has a useful jar for his birthday balloon. I wonder, when things don't go exactly as you planned or as you had intended, what would you do? Would you seek the advice of a friend? Would you press on with whatever you had to make do? Think about it. Relax, get comfortable, center yourself, put down your cup of coffee, put your feet flat on the floor, open your palms, ready to receive the moment. And listen to these words adapted from Rosamund and Benjamin Zander's The Art of Possibility. We keep looking so hard in life for the specific message, and yet we're unaware of the fact that the message we really need is all around us, and maybe even within us. We just have to stop demanding that it be on our terms, that it be on our conditions. And instead, we open ourselves to the possibility that what we may need at this time is right in front of us.
Each week, we take a moment to reflect on those in our lives and communities, those people who are weighing on our hearts and minds. I invite you to speak those names aloud or to yourself or enter them into the chat. May all those names which were spoken and unspoken feel the love of our community and find peace and healing this day.
Today's reading is a poem by Jeffrey Conyers, Characteristic Differences. They say this, we do that. They do this, we say that. Characteristic differences. We live here, they live there. They live there, we live here. Break down the walls and watch the ways problems disappear. They know us, we know them. They think this, they think that. Characteristic differences. Write down on paper and notice the same situation. We operate around illusion of what we know until you're in the same room and notice the many things in common. Characteristic differences.
This first song is the song which Pooh sang on the expedition to the North Pole, led by Christopher Robin. When he got to the end of the first verse, Christopher Robin said, "Hush," because they were coming to a dangerous place, which explains why there isn't a second verse.
They all went off to discover the pole. Owl and piglet and rabbit and all. It's a thing you discover, as I've been told, by owl and piglet and rabbit and all. Eeyore, Christopher Robin and Pooh, and Rabbit's relations all went too. And where the pole was, none of them knew. Sing hey for owl and rabbit and all. Sing hey for owl and rabbit and all of his friends and relations, and piglet and Pooh, and Kanga and Roo, and Eeyore and Christopher Robin and all.
The second song is a respectful Pooh song in praise of Piglet and describes so exactly what happened when Owl's house blew down that I shan't say any more about it.
Here lies a tree which Owl a bird was fond of when it stood on end, and Owl was talking to a friend called me, in case you hadn't heard, when something occurred. For lo, the wind was blusterous and flattened out his favorite tree, and things looked bad for him and we looked bad, I mean for he and us. I've never known them was. Then Piglet thought a thing courage. He said, "There's always hope. I want a thinnish piece of rope, or if there isn't any, bring a thinnish piece of string." So to the letterbox he rose, while Pooh and Owl said oh and hum. And where the letters always come, called letters only, Piglet screws his head and then his toes. Oh, gallant Piglet, ho, did Piglet tremble? Did he blinch? No, he struggled inch by inch through letters only, as I know because I saw him go. He ran and then he stood and shouted help for Owl a bird and Pooh a bear, until he heard the others coming through the wood as quickly as they could. Help, and rescue, Piglet cried, and show the others where to go. Sing ho for Piglet, ho. And soon the door was opened wide, and we were both outside. Sing ho for Piglet, oh, oh.
Earlier this year, in one of our Soul Matters packets, there was an optional exercise to reflect on a book or a poem or a writing which had an impact or influence on us. And I decided that since I'm a fairly active reader, this would be a natural choice for me. And I pondered many of the things which I had read over the years, and several things crossed my mind. But not settling on one particular piece, my mind paged through several authors such as Hemingway, Robert McCullough, Toni Morrison, Ron Chernow, and more recently, Ibram Kendi and Colson Whitehead. Then, one of the best sports books I'd ever read came to mind, Bums, about my childhood heroes, Campanella, Snyder, Robinson, Pee Wee Reese, the Dodgers, the ones who called Brooklyn their home. Now, that book was like honey to me. But then I realized that I'd slipped into remembering or sharing a recollection of a read that I had enjoyed, not necessarily one which had an impact. However, as I was still basking in the exploits of the Bums, another recollection came to mind. But first, a disclosure. I must tell you that after sharing this recollection with my Soul Matters colleagues, one of them remarked, "There may be a sermon in there." And lo, here we are. So come with me. I'm at my aunt's farm home and sitting upstairs on a bench window seat with the warmth of the sun coming in from the nearby windows. And seated next to me is my Aunt Eva. I was not yet able to read, or at least not very well, and Eva loved to read, and her upstairs seemed to be overflowing with books, many of which never seemed to have a home. We spent many hours with books during my family's frequent visits, and Eva would always make time for me to read with her, and as time passed, we read all of the Winnie the Pooh books, the stories of Pooh and his friends, and I believe there were 20 stories in all. And I love the characters, and you may know some of them as well. Piglet, Roo, Kanga, Tigger, Christopher Robin, Eeyore, just to name some of the residents of the 100-Acre Wood, which, by the way, you can visit yet today in East Sussex, England, where it is part of a larger 500-acre wood in the Ashton Forest. But Eva's house was always fun to visit, and part of the reason was because of Uncle Bill, who always seemed to be in good humor. I don't think he ever met a day that he didn't like. But sometimes there are difficult days. Listen in on a conversation between Pooh and Piglet. "Today was a difficult day," said Pooh, and there was a pause. "Do you want to talk about it?" said Piglet. "No," said Pooh after a bit. "No, I don't think so." "That's okay," said Pooh, and he came and sat beside his friend. "What are you doing?" said Pooh. "Nothing really," said Piglet. "Difficult days are so much easier when you know you've got someone there for you. And I'll always be here for you, Pooh." And as Pooh sat there, working through in his head his difficult day, while the solid, reliable Piglet sat next to him, swinging his legs, he thought his best friend had never been more right. I was enamored with these stories and with these characters. They had me. And years later, when I was in high school and talking with a group of friends, and we were talking about what are some of our favorite stories that we'd read up to that point, I remembered those mesmerizing reading sessions with Aunt Eva, and I told my friends that I loved the Winnie the Pooh stories, and Eeyore was my favorite character. Some of you may remember him, Eeyore the donkey who didn't think very highly of his tail, although, as he noted, he was attached to it. Well, a few days later, one of my friends who was artistic presented me with a charcoal sketch that she had made of Eeyore. I love that. I kept it for a number of years and even took it to college with me to adorn the wall of my freshman dorm room. But first, this reminds me, I need to tell you of something I came across. Now, I've been pronouncing Eeyore's name as Eeyore, and I just recently, after all these years, learned that when A.A. Milne wrote this story and settled on his name, he chose the name that I knew as Eeyore because of an English dialect whereby they dropped the R. Therefore, in Milne's mind, this word would be pronounced Eeyaw, which to Milne sounded much more accurate for a donkey sound than hee-haw. So I will try to practice that pronunciation through the rest of our time together. Now, I laid that out there and just kind of left you and started to move on, and I can sense that you're sitting there in your home and trying to process ee-haw, hee-haw. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to help you purge that thought and settle on which is really better. So what I want you to do is to envision you're here in the sanctuary together. And if you usually sit on the left side, or my right, of the sanctuary, you can probably imagine there's June and Bob seated near the front, and David and Adris and Elise and Alice and Bob and Barry and Barbara and Mitch and Sandy and Alex and Amy. You know what side you're on. Well, with that group, you're going to be participating. And those of you who sit over here, there's Richard and Nancy, Janet and Richard, Jeff, Paul and Nancy, Lois, Dale, Sally and Aaron. You all know what side you're on. And those of you in the balcony, I want you to be with that side. So stand up, get yourself relaxed, take a deep breath, and on the count of 3, say ee-yaw and hee-haw. All right, this side. 1, 2, 3. Ee-yaw, hee-haw. 1, 2, 3. Ee-yaw, hee-haw. Hopefully this gives you some clarity as to whether Milne was on target or not. Okay, let's try to relax, and we can proceed. Ruminating on my encounters with these characters led me to an aha realization that these stories had a much more profound effect on me than I ever realized. And as I dug deeper, you are familiar with the concept of dig deep, aren't you? Well, whenever my stepdad would order soup in a restaurant, he would always tell the server to dig deep. And as he explained it, that's where the good stuff is. The rest is just broth. So as I dug deeper to find the good stuff, I knew that I had to refamiliarize myself with these stories. And being in today's connected lifestyle, I did turn to the internet on a couple of occasions. And now, as you can imagine, you can get mired down on the internet, and you could get lost in the Myers-Briggs debate about the classification of each of these characters' personality. And take my word for it, there are some differences out there. Or you could get caught up in the explanation of personality disorders of these characters, which, as I understand it, stemmed from a tongue-in-cheek evaluation that some Canadian medical professionals put forth. And there are also UUA sermons to be found which touch on or reference Pooh, or utilize the book The Tao of Pooh, which was published in the 80s. But regardless of how I reconnected, the best way was to read the stories, to read them to myself or out loud to someone else. And I highly recommend that to you. Listen to another exchange between Pooh and Piglet. "When you first wake up in the morning, Pooh," Piglet said at last, "what's the first thing you say to yourself?" "What's for breakfast?" said Pooh. "What do you say, Piglet?" "I say, I wonder what's going to happen exciting today," said Piglet. And Pooh nodded thoughtfully. "It's the same thing," he said. "Now, how can you not be captivated by that? I suspect sometimes the humor or truth may have been lost on me at my young age. But isn't that like what happens in our search and discovery for truth and meaning? That today's understanding may be different than yesterday's truth. I believe what captured me was that while they each had their own challenges and distinct personalities, they forged a community that worked. A community that had an identity that prompted them to care for each other. They were friends and neighbors who sought each other's presence. No, it was more. They made space for each other. They valued each other's humanity. I know now that it was our humanity that was being held up in the mirror of the 100-acre wood. Why was I so taken with Eeyore, who was usually sad and lacking in optimism? Well, I'm not sure. I have always felt for and supported the underdog. Maybe that began with empathy for Eeyore. Who's to say? I had thought as a child that these individuals were wonderful, and yet it was the caring and acceptance that they exhibited towards one another that was indeed profound. May I even say it was their humanity that was resonating. I wanted to have friends like that. I wanted to be a friend like that. Eeyore said, "A little consideration, a little thought for others makes all the difference." Thoughtful words, important words. And even though he was often sad and in need of good cheer, he didn't slink away or drop out. But in spite of his own challenges, he kept being present. He kept showing up because he was part of the community. He wanted to be part of the community. He showed up when Owl lost his home, as Eeyore had happened to him. In his own way, he was dependable, endearing, and lovable. To me, he was like my mascot of the 100-acre wood. I think of Joseph Campbell, who wrote about the power of myth and stories passed down which illustrate and demonstrate truths. These characters lived what Campbell called the privilege of a lifetime. Campbell said, "The privilege of a lifetime is being who you are." That's our privilege as well. Isn't it everyone's privilege? In Pooh's world, things follow an order, the Tao, in that things are as they are. Eeyore, Pooh, and the other residents of the 100-acre wood learned to accept each other as they were and supported each other. In their community, there were differences in thought, differences in appearance, personality, strengths and quirks, and yes, differences in perspective and understandings, but they weren't perfect. When Kanga and Roo first came to the forest, the residents were suspicious and unsure of these newcomers. Nobody had any idea where they came from. There was no explanation, no documentation. Maybe they came from a foreign land beyond the forest. And also, another thing, Kanga carried her child in a pouch. Nobody here does anything like that. But they found ways to accept each other, and they accepted their differences. And then Tigger arrived with his boundless, bouncing joy and energy, which was both refreshing and at times, quite frankly, annoying. And some wondered, how could they get relief from his intensity? But they all truly cared for their community. They made time for each other. And despite their characteristic differences, there was no othering. There was no caste. In their world, there was community. One could also say that they personified the words of Bertrand Russell when he said, "Remember your humanity, forget the rest." To me, the rest is just broth anyway. But I wonder, can I dig deep within myself to get past the noise like they did? Do I offer the best in me and look for the best in others? Or do I just offer some broth as we pass by, focused on something else or some other place? What about you? What about us? Sometimes, like Tigger, we do annoy each other. Or like Owl, we pontificate and miss the point. Or like Rabbit, we obsess over the need to create order. Nonetheless, we need that energy from Tigger, or the pain of Eeyore, the heart of Pooh, or the wisdom of a piglet. Sometimes we need each other. Sometimes we need our differences. We know that with differences, staying in the moment, offering attentiveness, love, and compassion is not always easy. There is work involved and work to do in building our community. And I strive to be like Piglet. I want to be able to say, I'm here for you, no matter what you are, no matter who you are in this community or in the larger community. So, what began as an optional Soul Matters exercise led me to just what could be some early seeds of my Unitarian Universalism. But as I've been told, I just didn't know it yet. I also wonder if you dug down deep to find your seeds of UUism, where would that search lead you? What would you find?
You
When putting together service elements for today, I came across words of A.A. Milne in the form of a conversation between Pooh and Piglet. "I don't feel very much like Pooh today," said Pooh. "There, there," said Piglet. "I'll bring you tea and honey until you do." This quote spoke to me in reflecting on where we are with COVID. We are establishing a new normal as we begin to venture out, to see loved ones and dear friends. We look to the day when we can come back together for in-person church, and it may feel a little strange and even a little scary. Just like Pooh, we may not feel much like ourselves as we learn to interact with each other again. But remember, at the same time, we are also a community full of piglets who will be there to support each other and bring each other comfort. To me, this is part of stewardship. Stewardship to the church and stewardship to each other, and touches upon why I choose to support the church with both time and money. While sometimes we focus our financial discussions around keeping the lights on or maintaining the building, we need to remember that our dollars also support our community and our outreach. In other words, our stewardship to each other and those we touch outside the church. Since we are not yet at a point where we are able to pass a plate, there are 3 ways you can provide your offering to the church. You can mail a check to the office, you can donate online via our website, or you can use your smart device and give through the Give Plus app. Please indicate it is for Sunday morning offering. Please join me in dedicating our offering. To the work of this congregation, which is weaving a tapestry of love and action, we dedicate our lives and these our offerings.
Thanks, Carl. We are here to be lifted in love. Look at the trees, they tell us that we are here to be lifted in love. Look at the birds, they tell us we're here to be lifted in love, to listen to love as a flower raises its face to the sun. We are all one, here to be lifted in grace and love. We are here to be lifted in love. Look at the sky, it tells us we are here to be lifted in love. Look at the sea, it tells us we're here to be lifted in love, to listen to love as the children raise all their faces to the sun. We are all one, here to be lifted in grace and love. We are here to be lifted in love. Look at the trees, they tell us we are here to be lifted in love. Look at the birds, they tell us we're here to be lifted in love, to listen to love as a flower raises its face to the sun. We are all one, here to be lifted in grace and love.
I want to leave you with these words from Christopher Robin. You're braver than you believe, stronger than you seem, and smarter than you think. And finally, from Pooh himself, some people care too much. I think it's called love.
We extinguish our chalice with words from Israel Bafardi. My friends, when you go from here, know that our hearts are always in a holy place, for we are always connected to one another. Know that deep down, our hearts beat in one universal rhythm. May we find the sacred space to hear it. Amen, and blessed be.